We are in Romans chapter 1. We are continuing in Paul's introduction to his letter to the church in Rome. And he starts this section that Elias read for us, thanking and telling the church in Rome that he is going to be praying for them. He has been praying for them, and he's eager to get to them. And I want to read a couple things and then say something real quick. It says, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world." And I want to say this, I'm new to this church. I've only been your pastor now for almost exactly 6 months. It'll be 6 months on Tuesday. And this has been exactly what we all thought it was going to be, of course. I have had dozens and dozens and dozens of conversations with pastors and people from all over the world asking me, how's it going? How are the people doing? How's the church going? How are you doing? And I have had the chance to say over and over and over, literally dozens and dozens of times, I've been able to say these people are resilient, they have been full of faith, and they have been overwhelmingly welcoming to me and my family. And so I, like Paul, telling the church in Rome that he's been able to sing their praises around the world, I want you to hear that from me. I am very thankful for you. This whole thing, the fact that on Father's Day, which is historically the worst, lowest church attendance day of the year, right? You're here. The room is full. You've been through absolute hell on earth for the last 6 months, and you've been faithful. Not just to church attendance, but faithful to each other, faithful to the gospel, faithful to God. You have been resilient in every aspect of your life, and I have just been so blessed to be your pastor for these last 6 months. So I want to echo Paul's words here in these first few verses and just say that to you, from a heartfelt level. Thank you, and I have had the opportunity to sing your praises literally around the world, and so, yeah, thankful for that. Just wanted to say that. Paul then goes on, and in verse 16 and 17 are kind of the thesis statement for the entire book. And so we're going to come back to verses 16 and 17 over and over and over, because they function as kind of the lens through which we are going to see the rest of Paul's letter. Right? And so we're going to get to that. That's going to be the meat of our message today. So today I want to answer 3 questions, or get after 3 things. I want to answer who the gospel is for, why the gospel matters, and how the gospel works. And that's what we're going to do, verses 13 through 17. So let's start in verse 13. Paul says, I want you to know, brothers, and this word is adelphoi, it's brothers and sisters. It's where we get Philadelphia, right? The city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, known for its loving people. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish, so I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. So, the first question, who is the gospel for? Paul says that he's wanted to come to you to preach the gospel, to reap some harvest among you. And so he's writing to the church in Rome, as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. And then in verse 14 he says, I'm under obligation, or he says, I'm indebted to. And remember the slave language that Paul started this letter with, to say he is indebted to Christ, and through that he is also indebted to Christ's people and to the mission that he's been given. So he says, I'm under obligation both to the Greeks and to the barbarians. Now I just love that he basically goes, it's the Greeks, which for them just meant the Hellenized people, the civilized people under Greek influence, and then everybody else, those barbarians, right? It's just Angelinos and then the suburbs, it's whatever that is. He's really saying to those of you who are in Rome, Hellenized, cultured people, and I'm indebted to everybody else. Then he says, also to the wise and to the foolish. And again, borrowing on cultural language, the Greeks were, wisdom was at the center of the Greek value system. And so when he says, I'm indebted to you Greeks and everybody else, and I'm indebted to the wise, those of you who think of yourselves as cultured and mature and thoughtful and intellectual, and to the dummies, It's like, I'm here for everybody. Literally, the Christians, those in the church, and the rest of the Gentiles, to the cultured and the barbarians, to the intellectuals and to the morons. It's in the Bible. It says, so I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome, to all of those in Rome. In other words, the gospel is for everyone. Whether this is your first time ever stepping foot in church, or you have been literally at this church your entire life, the gospel is for you. Luther, in the introduction to his epistle to the Galatians, that's Martin Luther, says this. He goes, here I must take counsel of the gospel. I must hearken to the gospel, which teaches me not what I ought to do, but what Jesus Christ, the Son of God, hath done for me. To wit, he says, I got to start saying that. To wit, that he suffered and died to deliver me from sin and death. The gospel wills me to receive this and to believe it. And this is the truth of the gospel. It is also the principal article of all Christian doctrine, wherein the knowledge of all godliness consists. Catch this part. He says, most necessary it is, therefore, that we should know this article well, teach it unto others, and beat it into their heads continually. Martin Luther tells me to beat your heads continually with the gospel. Why? Well, Martin Luther actually makes the argument that all sin, all disobedience flows out of a fundamental disobedience of the first commandment, which is to love the Lord your God and to have no other idols before him. So Luther argues that every bit of brokenness, every bit of sin that comes into our lives is a fundamental disbelief or a disobedience to that first commandment, or in other words, a disbelief in the gospel. And so the gospel becomes this central kind of animating idea. It's not simply the thing you believe to become a Christian and then you kind of move on to more serious things. No, the gospel is the center of it all. It's the animating power of the Christian life. In fact, I would argue that every sin in our lives is a product of either passive disbelief in the gospel or active disbelief in the gospel. Let me illustrate that for you. We talk about the gospel as creation, fall, redemption, restoration, right? That's the big picture story of God's word, that God created all things, that humans rebelled against God's creation, sin enters the world, Jesus comes to redeem the world, and a promise of a future restoration. So I would argue that every moment of sin in our lives, every moment of rebellion has at its root an either passive or active disbelief in one of those aspects of the gospel. So, for instance, when we reject or do not actively believe in the idea of a creator God who made us, who formed us, who's given us purpose and will and meaning in life, we default to a desire for control, for manipulation. We find in ourselves a desire to be worshiped. We build or show narcissistic tendencies. I would argue all of that comes from a disbelief in the idea of a creator God who made all things and is the authority over all things. When there is no authority, we begin to be insecure and try to control, because we feel out of control, and when there's nobody or nothing controlling sovereignly the universe, we feel insecure, and so we start to control. The fall, when we reject the fall or ignore the fall, we are prone to autonomy and selfishness. And I would argue most forms of debauchery are a product of us not taking the fall seriously, that basically a rejection of the idea that sin even exists, or that there are consequences for it, that there is no right and wrong. There was never a moment where things fundamentally broke. Disbelief in the redemptive work of Jesus results in moralism and striving, a kind of utopianism where we try to build out of our own efforts a world that is more in line with what we want it to be. That's a rejection of Christ's redemption. Political ideology is at its root a rejection of Christ's redemptive work. We go, no. Jesus was great, Even if we are Christians, we might go, Jesus is great, and what you do is super important, but what we really need is a government that enforces it. We go, well, okay, there's a difference between let's make wise government and us looking to government to be what only Jesus can be. That's a rejection of Christ's redemptive work. Lastly, when we ignore or reject the idea of Christ's ultimate restoration, it results in things like workaholism, a fear of failure, or nihilism. Because if there is no promise of a greater good, a perfection that will one day be brought about by God, then it's kind of up to us to bring about whatever future and hope we want. So it spurs in us a need to accomplish and a need to shape and a need to form a future that is actually out of our control, or it leads to nihilism and despair and depression, and we just give up because there's nothing. We've tried and we tried and we tried, and nothing ever works. So if we think about it, every single thing that we struggle with or would call sin has at its root a fundamental disbelief in the gospel. So the answer to who the gospel is for is that it's for both Christians and non-Christians. And we need to hear it over and over and over and over because we are constantly, every day, all day, being wooed by alternative gospels. Different explanations of why we are here, different cultural stories, different reasons for pain and suffering in our world that lead to different solutions to that pain and suffering. And then different reasons to have hope for the future or a different picture of what the future might look like, or again, simply despair that it will ever come about. So for that reason, and this may get repetitive, but I will obey Luther. And I will beat you in the head with the gospel for the next 25 years. 70. I committed to 70. So that's who the gospel's for. Verse 16, why the gospel matters. Remember verse 15, he says, so I am eager to preach the gospel to you because I am not ashamed of the gospel. For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Now, Paul roots this eagerness to preach the gospel in the sense that he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. So the question is, why would Paul be ashamed? Why bring that up? Why wouldn't he just go, I'm eager to preach the gospel because the gospel does this or that, this or that, this is your hope. He starts by going, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Why would he say that? Why would he be ashamed? Why would we be ashamed? Why are we ashamed? Because the truth of it is, we are ashamed of the gospel. Every single one of us in this room, no matter where you are, has had a moment where you had an opportunity to be eager to preach the gospel in some context, and you didn't. You hedged. You hesitated. You resisted. Why? Why would we do that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. The gospel is offensive, and we like to be liked. It's that simple. We've all been in scenarios where we had an opportunity to bear witness to the gospel in some way, and I don't mean on a street corner with a bullhorn. I just mean in a relationship, in some context, where you could have said something, you could have gone an extra step and been explicit about your faith, explicit about your internal motivations for why you live the way you live, whatever it was. You have had opportunities, even probably in the last week or so, have had an opportunity to take that step, to be eager to preach the gospel. And you didn't. You didn't. I didn't. I've had opportunities and didn't. So why? Well, like I said, the gospel is offensive and we like to be liked. And so there's moments where we are afraid that if we say the thing, whoever we're talking to will be offended or won't like what we said or won't like us, and so we hesitate. How is it offensive? I have a list. The gospel describes a world with God in it. Not a vague sense of spirituality, but God, with a name, an active role in the world, and a will that he expects to be obeyed. That's offensive. The gospel describes a world where you were made for a reason, and your job isn't to create meaning or create purpose, but to discover it and submit to it. That's offensive. It describes a world where everything that's wrong is our fault, my fault, your fault, not society, not this political party, that political party, not progressivism or conservatism. You, me, us. It's our fault. We did it. The gospel describes a world that has no good people, only needy, broken people who need a savior. The gospel describes a world where miracles happen. God became a man, performed actual miracles, and then came back to life. That's crazy. The gospel describes a world where there are clear ethics, real right and wrong, eternal values to hold to. It describes a world full of grace, one in which you can't earn anything that really matters, so you don't get credit. It describes a world where you are loved by the creator and sustainer of the universe, and it has nothing to do with you. And on and on and on and on. And there's lots of reasons to be ashamed, actually. If what we care most about is the people around us. In fact, this is kind of a great self-test, right? So ask yourself, I can't answer this for you, and we're not going to do this out loud, tell you in advance. This is just all in your own head. Ask yourself, what part of the gospel are you ashamed of, and why? This will tell you a lot about your own idols. Who pops into your head? Which part would they mock, and how would they mock it? For me, it's the part that makes me look dumb. I don't like looking dumb. I want smart people to think I'm smart. And so when there are opportunities to be explicit about my faith, I think, okay, but they might think I'm dumb, and I don't have a chance to really make the logical argument that I know I could make. And so instead of being able to do this kind of just expression of the gospel or my faith without all the ability to rationalize it, I should probably just not say anything. It's just because I don't want to look dumb. I don't want to look naive. I care that smart people think I'm smart. That may not be your thing. Some of you are ashamed of the parts that make you seem closed-minded or bigoted because you desperately want to be thought of as sympathetic and accepting to the people who think of themselves that way too. We all have our shame. We all have a thing that makes us resist in that moment. And we all know that moment. We have been presented with that moment hundreds of times in our lives. Sometimes we've taken it, sometimes we haven't, sometimes we've run from it, sometimes we've just kind of rationalized our way out of it. In fact, I've experienced, as a pastor for 20 years now, that most people who deconstruct their faith or walk away from the faith don't do so for primarily rational reasons. Like, I've met very few people who are like, well, I thought this, and then this, and then this, and then this. No, it almost never happens that way. It's not to say that all deconstruction is irrational. It's not that at all. But it is driven almost exclusively relationally. And then the rationale follows behind it. So what happens is you get into a relationship or you're in a relationship and you want that relationship to be good and positive and to keep it and you want them to think well of you, but then they shift they change their mind about something or something changes in the relationship and you go, oh, well, I don't want to lose that relationship, so maybe this part of Christianity doesn't have to come with me and I can just hold on to the relationship and lose this part of the faith, and then I'm going to go find a book that tells me that's okay. The relationship always leads. The rationale, if at all, follows behind. Why? Because we get ashamed. So Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel. Why? Because Paul's so holy and perfect, he doesn't have any idols, he doesn't care what people think. No, he's just a guy. He's got all his things. He says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. Paul says, it's not that I think all of the stuff makes sense to everybody or I just don't care what people think of me because I'm just an independent guy. It's not that. He goes, I have seen the transforming power of the gospel, and that has been so good that it overwhelms those moments of potential shame or embarrassment or fear or potential of loss of relationships. He goes, I've seen that it is so good that I am willing to put my relationships on the line. I am willing to put my own reputation on the line because it has done so much. Paul has seen the saving and transforming work of the gospel in his own life and in the lives of countless others to the point that he's able to go, I got no shame anymore. It's too good. It's too good. There's a old dead pastor by the name of Thomas Chalmers. Chalmers was an amazing communicator, philosopher, writer, and he wrote a book called The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. It's a great book, super hard to read. I'm going to read you the best section, then you can say you've read it. Thomas Chalmers, The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. He says, it is seldom that any of our bad habits or flaws disappear by a mere process of natural extinction. At least, it is very seldom that this is done by the instrumentality of reasoning or by the force of mental determination. But what cannot be destroyed may be dispossessed, and one taste may be made to give way to another and lose its power entirely as the reigning affection of the mind. So he goes, it's really hard to just kind of let go of something, but sometimes you can let go of one thing in order to grab a better thing. He says, the boy, for instance, who ceases at length to be a slave to his appetite, does so because a more mature taste has brought it into subordination. The young man may cease to idolize sensual pleasure, but it is because the idol of wealth has gotten the ascendancy. So the love of money can cast out the love of sloth. However, even the love of money can cease to have mastery over the heart if it is drawn into the world of ideology and politics, and he is now lorded over by a love of power and moral superiority. So again, those of you who are parents of older kids have all seen your child go from like lazy kid who doesn't get up before 11 to motivated kid after his first paycheck. And he goes, ooh, I like money. And so money and the desire for it motivates him to change something about himself that he didn't otherwise have to change. It says, but there is not one of these transformations in which the heart is left without an object. The heart's desire for an ultimate object may be conquered, but its desire to have some object is unconquerable. The only way to dispossess the heart of an old affection is through the expulsive power of a new one. It is therefore only when admitted into the number of God's children through faith in Jesus Christ that the spirit of adoption is poured out on us. It is then that the heart, brought under the mastery of one great, predominant, and supreme affection, is delivered from the tyranny of all its former desires, and the only way that deliverance is possible. Therefore, it is not enough to hold out to your people the mirror of their own imperfections. It is not enough to come forth with a demonstration of the evanescent character of their enjoyments, or to speak to their consciences of their follies. Rather, make every legitimate method of finding access to their hearts for the love of him who is greater than the world. That's what Paul did. Paul doesn't say, I am not ashamed of the gospel because I talked myself out of it. I am not ashamed of the gospel because I went to therapy a long time and I've put shame away. I'm not ashamed. He doesn't say, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because I don't care what people think of me. I'll be my own man. No. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because I have seen the even greater power that it holds than any of these other things. I have experienced the great depth of the power of the gospel. It has transformed my life. It has transformed the lives of the people around me, so much so that I don't even care. I don't even care. It's like the power that people have over us, the power that culture can have over us, the power that our own desires and personality and want of reputation have over us, have this controlling and guiding power until and unless we see God in all his fullness and see the life of the gospel that is offered to us in it. And it is then and only then that we can be able to dispossess some of these old affections. So it's because of that, Paul says, I am eager to preach the gospel. I am eager to preach the gospel. And you see how that is the difference between It's almost as if there's a spectrum of like, I will actively deny the gospel, like Peter denying Jesus 3 times. Every opportunity I have, he just had layup after layup given to him, and he denies and denies and denies, all the way down the spectrum from like, I don't take advantage of all the opportunities. I don't take advantage of any of the opportunities. Sometimes I say things. And so Paul goes, I am eager to preach the gospel. That is on this far other end where he's looking for opportunities to tell people about the life-changing power of the gospel. Because he's seen it. He's seen it in the lives of himself and the people around him. So, verse 17, how the gospel works. Paul says, for in it, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Now, this phrase, the righteousness of God, and in fact, this verse 17, is one of the most highly and most extensively studied verses in Romans, because the structure of it is a little weird to the degree that a lot of commentators are like, does he mean this? Does he mean that? A lot of it is on 2 things. One, what does it mean? What is the righteousness of God? And secondly, what does this mean from faith for faith, or from faith from beginning to end? Kind of the way the Greek is structured is kind of hard to figure out what exactly it is Paul is saying. Now, it's a problem because verse 16 and 17 are his thesis, so we kind of got to understand what he's saying. Now, almost everybody is of the consensus that this idea of the righteousness of God is kind of what it seems at plain face. It is the righteousness just means rightness of God. But what is Paul kind of calling our attention to? Well, I think verse 18 gives us a little bit of context and actually a little bit of a spoiler for next week. Because Paul immediately transitions and says, for the wrath of God, that's next week. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who, by their unrighteousness, suppress the truth. So what we see in verse 18 is Paul talking about this unrighteousness of men, and it's meant to be juxtaposed with the righteousness of God. Right? So the unrighteousness of men are the acts and behaviors that we do that are unright. Simple, right? Bad grammar is sometimes the easiest way to understand things. It is unright activities on behalf of men that actually have this power of suppressing the truth about who God is. We'll talk about that next week. So he's juxtaposing that with the rightness of God, the right actions or behaviors of God. Now, what is that? Well, he's already told us. In verse 4, when it says that the Son of God, that when Jesus was declared to be the Son of God in power, according to the Spirit of holiness in his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. The fundamental righteous act of God is in the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's the climax of the gospel. That is the power of the gospel, is that moment when Jesus went to the cross, taking all of our sin forever, that every sin that we've ever committed or thought about or anything, past, present, future, put that to death and then overcame it on the 3rd day in the resurrection. That's the righteousness of God. So he says this, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. In other words, it's all faith. Meaning, our part in this is simply to believe in and to entrust ourselves to the righteousness of God. God moved in this amazing way to express his love for us, to demonstrate his power in the cross and the resurrection. And for us, from beginning to end, all our part is faith. All we have to do is believe that what he did accomplished what he said he did. That's it. That from beginning to end, which is why, going back again to the beginning, Paul goes, I'm here to preach the gospel to everybody, because your right response, your responsibility is simply to trust in the gospel, to believe in the gospel. Now, sometimes I get into conversations with people, often non-Christians who have a church background, and they have kind of a problem with this idea of faith. right? And they go, well, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why wouldn't it be that just like good people go to heaven? We go, okay, well, what's a good person? You kind of go down all that road. None of us are good. He goes, well, okay, well, why doesn't God just kind of grade on a curve? Great idea. I think I'd do all right. And, but like, at what point does God go, okay, that's too sinful. Y'all are out, right? Like, how does that work, right? Like, if we're grading on a curve, there's always people that are in, and there's people that are out, and then there's all you kind of normies in the middle, right? That's how a curve works. So at what point does he only take the front end of the curve? Does he take half the normies, all the normies? Is it just the people at the back end? How would that work exactly? Okay, and they go, all right. They go, but how can it just be faith? How can it just be that I, like in my head or in my heart, whatever that means to believe something in your heart, like what does that even mean to go, okay, well I'm in? Well, think about the gospel. The gospel is the story. I'm going to try to say this in like normal person language because y'all are normal and I'm a pastor. The good news is simply that God exists, that he made it all, that we have lived in rebellion against God, not followed him, not obeyed him, not used the world the way he intended it to be used. And he went, hey, that's really bad. So I'm going to send my son, God himself in the flesh, to live a perfect life, to die, and then to demonstrate the fact that I am God, I am who I said I am. I'm going to be raised on the third day, and I promise I'm going to come back and make it all good again. Okay? So the invitation is just go, hey, just believe that. That's it. Like, just believe that that's what I did and that's how it went. And if you do that, then you just get to be with me forever, right? The good news is that God exists, he loves us, and he has invited us into life with him. All we have to do is go, yeah, okay, I believe that. I'm with you. Let's go. That's it. I mean, the let's go part is all of your life in obedience, and that's not nothing. But that's the invitation. So if it's true that God is real and God made everything and God made a way, and then he goes, hey, just come walk with me now for the rest of your life. And then for eternity in heaven, you go, yeah, okay. That starts to make some sense. There's no earning, there's no striving, just a fundamental belief that God is telling the truth about himself and about the world. And then that belief extends into every single part of your life, where you start to go, okay, yeah, I'm in. So I guess that means if God created me, then he probably created me, and he created me for a purpose, then I got to figure out what that purpose is and then go do it. That's it. Forever. That's the power of the gospel. It's just this simple invitation that we can layer on all of this confusion and all these layers and layers and layers of what does it mean and how do we do it. It's just God going like, hey, I made you. Come be with me. And if you come be with me, you can be with me forever. Now, the flip side of that is, for those who are not Christians and go, well, why can't I believe in Allah, or why can't I believe in, whatever the other things are, I can come up with one God. Come on, I can do better than that. We go, okay, so if God is real, and if God is who he says he is, that would be like him looking down on the earth and all of us going like, okay, but I'm with you, but I'm going to describe you in a totally different way. I'm going to interact with you in a totally different way. Like, imagine if you tried that in your marriage. Like, for instance, I love my wife. I always will, always have. She's amazing. And imagine I got up here and said, things I love about my wife, I love her dark brown hair. I love how tall she is. I love how artistic she is. I love that she's a reader, that she likes to go to bed early. I just love all those things about her. That'd be amazing, right? Except that if you knew my wife, you'd know that none of those things are true. She has blonde hair. She is quite short. I'm pretty sure she knows how to read. And she likes to go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. None of that is true. So would she feel loved by that? No. She's not going to feel loved by this when she hears me on the podcast tomorrow. So God just goes, this is me. You want to be with me? I made a way. Let's go. And if you want to be with me, great. You can be with me for eternity. If you don't want to be with me, okay. Then you won't be with me for eternity. And that's the wrath part we're going to talk about next week. So I want to do one last thing here. Paul says, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. That word power is the Greek word dunamis. Dunamis is the word where we get dynamite from, right? So the idea here is that the power of God is that he will blow up your life. That's the good news. The power of God is that he will blow up your life. I would argue that it would be bad news if the power of God was just like 10 life hacks for how to live a better life. That would be absolute weakness. That would be no better than any random Instagram influencer you stumble upon. It's no better. God's intention, God's power is to blow up your life completely. And to do so in a way you never would. That's the power of it. You would never blow up your own life the way he would blow up your life for you. I'm reading I've read through the Narnia books with just about all my kids, and I'm reading Voyage of the Dawn Treader with my youngest, William. And there's this part in Voyage of the Dawn Treader where Lucy and Edmund are in Narnia, and they accidentally brought their cousin Eustace. And Eustace is the worst, okay? I've never hated a kid more, to be honest, than that 10-year-old. And he's the worst, and he kind of gets isolated and separated from everybody else, and he falls asleep on a dragon's hoard of gold. And obviously, because if you fall asleep on a dragon's hoard of gold, you wake up a dragon. We all know this. And so he wakes up as a dragon, and he doesn't want to be a dragon. He wants to be a real boy. And so he's trying to get the dragon skin off of him. And it says this. I'm going to read it from you from Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It says, sleeping on a dragon's hoard with greedy, dragonish thoughts in his heart, he had become a dragon himself. Eustace found that no matter how many layers of dragon skins he managed to peel off of himself, he was still a dragon. Then the lion, Aslan, Jesus. Then the lion said, but I don't know if it spoke. He said, you will have to let me undress you. I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now. So I just lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, and there was I, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch, and smaller than I had been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that very much, for I was tender underneath now that I had no skin on, and he threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. And then it became perfectly delicious. And as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. I'd turned into a boy again. Only God will go deep enough to make a difference. We'll peel layers off. We'll try to conform our behavior, and we'll try this habit or that habit, and we'll try to really hard to read the Bible every day, and we'll try really hard to pray, but we will never, of our own volition, go deep enough to get to the heart. We have to let God do it. We have to let him blow up our lives. It is the only thing that can free you from the tyranny of other people's opinions of you and how much you care about it and how much you let them control your life. It's simple and it's terribly hard. You have to do it once and then forever. To say, God, blow up my life. Get all the way down to the heart of it. Tear it up from the inside out. All we have to do is say, all right, God, let's go. Do it. I want to be free. I want to have life. I want to be who you made me to be. I want to do what you made me to do. I want to experience the power of God unto salvation. And then let him do what he wants to do. That's it. That's our hope. This is the frame of the whole book of Romans, the lens through which Paul is going to get after some stuff. And he wants to establish from the very beginning the salvation by grace that leads to life. Because we're going to get into hard stuff. Immediately, we're going to get into hard stuff. Because you have to understand the fundamental love that God has for you. The by grace way he has made for you. But know at the front end, it will, if you let it, blow up your life in the absolute best way. That is the call of the gospel. Let's pray. Jesus, we are indebted to you. Whether we know it or not, whether we believe it or not, admit it or not, we owe you our very existence. You've made us, you've formed us, you've loved us, you've protected us, you've provided for us. You have done everything for us that we could never do. And finally, and most ultimately, you have made a way for us to be with you that we could never find. God, I pray that you would protect us from the shame of wanting to be liked. Protect us from being ashamed of the gospel, so that we might be not only eager to preach it, but eager to live it in our own lives. That we would experience that dunamis power, that you would blow us up, blow up our lives, so that we can experience that healing, that freedom to just be yours. Lord, we need you. In Jesus' name we pray.